This is a super crash course into editing. So let's begin. The first concept is the probably one of the most important things you'll talk to any editor. The number one rule really is to keep the story clear. Your job is to provide a coherent story that people can follow. If the story is not clear and you confuse the audience, then you're not doing your job as an editor. Your job is not to confuse people, but to provide them with a clear and compelling story. Keep the story clear is rule number one. Rule number two is kind of harkens to what the purpose of editing is, and that is basically to find the best performances in all the footage that you're given. So when you do find a strong performance, essentially that's like finding gold. So you want to stay with a strong performance for as long as you can. So when you find an actor that gives you a great performance, or there's some scene or shot in your film that is fantastic and propels the story forward, then you stay with that. If someone's giving you like this really heartfelt speech or monologue about something and there's tears rolling down their face and you're just gripped by what they're saying, you don't cut from that. You stay with that. And so that's number two, is stay with a strong performance for as long as you can. Number three is a shot should last no longer than it takes to describe it. So this goes to the idea of how long should you be in a particular shot? How long do you hold that shot? And a rule of thumb would be to say for the time that it takes you to describe it. So if you show a picture of a man sitting under a tree, you would say, that's a man sitting under a tree. So what is that? 2 seconds, 3 seconds, and then on to the next. The more complicated the scene is, then the longer you should hold it, because it's going to take you longer to describe it. Rule number four is you want the audience to feel the editing, not notice it. So by the way you juxtapose, sequence your shots, really what you're doing is you're creating a feeling by doing that. And if you create a feeling, or you're cutting on an idea, or you're creating a feeling, the audience is not going to notice the edit. They're going to be drawn to the emotion and the feeling. So they're not going to be drawn by the cuts. They're not going to see the cuts. So that's just a general idea of that you want, if the footage that you're editing is evoking an emotion in you, then that is probably going to evoke an emotion in others. And if you do evoke an emotion in someone, then they're not going to be noticing your editing. So you want them to feel your edits, not notice them. Say, hey, why did we just cut away from this? That was great. Why are we over here now? Why did we do that? You don't want that to go on in the audience's mind. Number five is the question that you should always be asking yourself, and that question is, whose scene is this? And what is this story or this shot really about? So if you don't know what your story is about and you don't know whose scene is it, then you're not going to know who to focus on and follow. So that's the question you're always asking in any shot is, whose shot is this, and what is this shot really about? So that's just kind of a basic principle. So always know who the scene is about, what the story is really about, and focus and follow that. Number six is you must review all the footage and keep notes about your first reactions. The first time you see the film or the shots, that's as close as you're going to come to the fresh eyes of an audience. So you want to make a note about what your initial reaction was, because that's of some value, how it affected you initially, emotionally. And if you don't have a note, you haven't written a journal or a note, you're probably going to forget how that made you feel the very first time. And you have to see all the footage, unfortunately. So if someone goes out and shoots 100 hours of footage, unfortunately, you're going to have to watch 100 hours of footage, because you need to know what's available and where the good stuff is. And if you haven't looked at everything, you're not going to know where the good stuff is. Number seven is creating emotion trumps everything. So there are basic principles of editing. There are some rules, guidelines, etc. But creating emotion trumps all the other rules. So if you're creating emotion, then you're doing your job, and that creating emotion even trumps the story itself. So the idea is that you want people in tears. You want people laughing. You want people feeling whatever it is that the movie's supposed to be making them feel, and that's where you're really creating the most impact. Number 9, always portray your actors in the best possible light. That kind of ties into a rule in photography, is that when you're taking pictures of people, you want them to look good. You want them to look their best. No one likes seeing a picture of themselves that looks crappy. And if you're portraying an actor where he's, the lighting's a little off and there's, he looks goofy, or it's highlighting defects in his face or her face, the actor's not going to like you any more than you would like someone editing in a terrible picture of yourself. So always try to portray actors in the best possible light, and of course within the confines of the story, within the limits of the story. So if someone's technically supposed to look bad, then of course you can make them look bad. But other than that, you want people to look their best. You want them to look iconic. Number 10 is kind of interesting concept, is don't use one shot if 2 shots will work better. So that really forces you, that statement really forces you to think about what you're doing. So let's say you're panning from, you got image A over here and image B over here, and you're going to connect them with a panning shot. Well, is there any value? Do we really need to see what's in the middle of what we're panning across? And if we don't, then we would cut that, and we would just start on image A and cut to image B. We don't need to see the pan if we don't need the pan. If there's nothing in the pan other than the camera just moving, then you should go with 2 shots, not 1 shot. The other side of that is number 11, is don't use 2 shots if 1 shot will work better. So back to the panning example, you got image A and you got image B over here. Well, if there's something interesting that connects them, that's kind of in the story, maybe like, I don't know, a dead body lying there, then yeah, then do that. That propels the story. So you really need to think about each and every shot and everything that's in that shot. And does it make sense? Should it be 1 shot? Should it be 2 separate shots? That's your job as an editor, to put that together. Number 12 is you can't rarely ever go wrong cutting on the eyes. Eyes are the most expressive things about us as human beings. And so when you see, when you go to somebody's eyes, or you cut away from somebody's eyes, or you cut to someone else's eyes, you really can't go wrong. That's a great editing cut point. It's probably the most natural of all the cut points of where you could cut from something. So you'd have an actor, and you have his face, and then he hears a sound and he turns to look. At that point you can cut, because the audience wants to see what he's looking at. Cutting on eyes is almost even more important than cutting on motion. The eyes are a great place to cut to and from. Number 13 is editing, and this really, I have it as number 13, but really this is probably one of the most important rules of editing that you can even know, and even about filmmaking in general. And it actually took me a while to get my mind around this idea, but it profoundly affected me. And number 13 is editing, and you could also say with that, filmmaking portrays the psychological experience of a situation, not the actual situation. So when you're editing, you're not trying necessarily to create reality as it exists 100%. I mean, there are some film schools of thought on that, it's got to be absolutely truthful, and we're trying to recreate an exact copy of reality. But the truth is, everybody has their own perception of reality. Reality is not the same for everybody, and as a storyteller, as a filmmaker, you are creating a story. It's your interpretation of the story. It's your interpretation of reality. 2 people in the same car driving down the same road will each have different perceptions of that experience based on their own personalities. They're not everyone's going to be looking at the same thing for the exact same amount of time. So when you're editing, keep that in your mind of who's ever shot it is really what you're editing is the mental world or the psychological experience of that situation for that character. You're not trying to actually convey the actual situation objectively. You're trying to convey a psychological experience of that situation from that character's or storyteller's perspective. So it may be that, if the character is on edge, then we're going to be closer in on everything because everything's getting on this guy's nerves. So obviously sounds are going to be louder, things are going to be closer because he's feeling his space is being encroached upon. So he's agitated. So the film is going to be conveyed that way. Number 14, and this highlights the relationship between a filmmaker and an editor, is you can't edit what wasn't shot. And that really seems pretty basic, but it's so true. Is if you don't know what your story is as a filmmaker and you get out there and it's not clear in your mind and you don't have a vision, then you're going to be shooting all over the place and you're going to be missing things. And then you're going to bring it back to try to edit it. And it's like, oh my gosh, I don't have a shot of this, that, and the other. Well, you can't edit it because you didn't shoot it. So you want to make sure you get all the shots you need and probably go overboard a little bit. I hear of some filmmakers that they shoot minimally, and that editors really hate that because it puts them in a corner where they're left shortchanged with trying to create or go along with what the story is, and there's no footage to match the story. So as a filmmaker, you probably want to err on the side of getting too much versus too little, because you can't edit it if it wasn't shot. And this number 15 is kind of a paradox. There are no absolute rules, and that's true. I mean, you've got continuity editing, and then you've got discontinuity editing. So, just as someone will say, you never make a jump cut, you turn around and there's a movie full of jump cuts. And the director of that movie's got every justification in the world for why he did it that way. He was trying to maybe create a certain aspect of reality. Maybe that's how he perceives reality. So his reality is jump cuts. So that's what he's doing. Somebody else could say, I don't like jump cuts. That throws me out of the film. It's too jarring. Well, there is no absolute. Film is an art. You may like a movie. Other people may not like it. It just depends on the person. So in that sense, there are no absolute rules. It's whatever people ultimately like. So I had a screenwriter, a friend of mine, tell me one time, in Hollywood, there are no absolute rules and they're strictly enforced. And that's kind of the same way with editing is there are ideas, guidelines, concepts, but you can break the rules. Number 16 is the more face and eyes the audience sees, the better your film's going to be. And the reason for that is, again, going back to emotion. So if you show me a movie and all I see is the back of someone's head all day long, chances are I'm not going to get as emotional about it as if I can see their face. So since our faces communicate emotion, it's important for us to be able to see that in the film, in the movie. So the fuller the face, usually the better. Unless, of course, you're trying to create a specific effect or an air of mystery or something like that. But generally, show us the face and the eyes especially. 17 is really interesting to me, and this is a bad ending can ruin a whole movie. And, if you think about that, that's really, really interesting. So you can, what is it about? I don't have an answer for that, but it's true, right? I mean, if you watch, let's say, a 120-minute movie, and the first 115 minutes were absolutely fantastic, but the last 5 minutes, it had a terrible ending, people are going to think the whole movie sucks because they didn't like the way it ended. And so it's something to be mindful of as an editor. How does it end? And a lot of people think, well, it's my story and I'm going to, end it the way I want to end it. Well, you know what? If everybody enjoyed the ride up until the last 5 minutes, it's that last 5 minutes that's going to lose your audience for you. And you don't really want that, do you? I mean, maybe you do. Maybe, you say, well, I'm an artist and, it's my message and screw them if they don't like it. But, it's going to affect you professionally if people are pissed off at you because the ending of your movie sucked. So endings are very important, and be mindful of how it ends. And that's why people like their good endings. You know, people like their resolution. They like completion. They don't like things hanging, unless, of course, you're deliberately trying to create a cliffhanger to build up excitement for a potential sequel or something like that. But that's a little different from what this rule is saying. 18. The general concept, this really relates to editing in general, is that you want to track for emotional impact and place highs and lows for maximum effect. So, like, let's say in the course of your footage, you've got maybe 3 really critical turning points. Well, you want to be careful not where you place them exactly in the context of the whole. So you want to try to see the movie holistically from start to finish, and be very careful where you put your greatest scenes, because people are going to be looking to that high mark. So it sets a high mark. And so if you put like the most fantastic scene of the whole movie right in the very beginning, well, the rest of the movie is going to be kind of a letdown, because nothing quite can compare to that. Whereas if you put it maybe like at the 80% mark, or maybe at the 7/8 of the way into the movie, then that's different. And then we can come down off that fantastic climax or whatever it was, and then go about our way. You know, we breathe a sigh of relief, relax for a few minutes, and then the movie ends. So be aware of where the high points and the low points are in your movie, and be careful where you place them, and be sure to place them so that you're getting maximum impact. Number 19 is the more details, the better. And details, when you think of details, what I think of details is I really think of like extreme close-ups or close-ups, and I think of production design and how much went into props and things like that. So, you know, it may seem like, well, it's such a small little thing in the movie, like maybe the ring the person had on their finger, or maybe the pen that they're using, or maybe a business card they're looking at, or maybe it's an old photo. I mean, it could be an infinite number of things, but it's a detail, and it's something usually specific to the character. And so you want to make sure that you get all of that, get all those things. All those things help build characters. And even the quirkier the item is, the better. So it may seem like, well, that's really bizarre that this guy keeps a collection of nuts and bolts in a coffee cup, you know, on a shelf somewhere, and that's like kind of weird, and do I want to waste my time with that? Well, yes, you do, because that's a weird little detail, and it would be nice to see that little jar of rusty bolts or whatever it is, and it could be anything. And hopefully it's not a cliche kind of thing, like you know, the burning cigarette in the ashtray, or the guy blowing, you know, circles into the, you know, smoke circles into the into the air. You know, hopefully it's not a cliche, but it's something original detail about that character. And those are the kinds of things that help make a movie memorable and characters memorable. And I'm going to wrap up here on number 20, which if it doesn't serve the story, cut it out. Cut it. And that's really hard to get your mind around, because it's like it could be a beautiful scene, like just something amazing. Maybe you think it's an establishing shot of something, or it's and then, you know, maybe you went out and you shot all day long, and you got it right at the golden hour, and it's a beautiful establishing shot. And then let's say you trudged another half hour to get a shot of the stream, and it's beautiful, and there's trees, and the beams of light are coming through the trees, and it's just an absolutely beautiful scene, but it doesn't match your story, or it doesn't do anything for your story. Then in that sense, you've got to be able to, what they say is, kill your babies, and you got to get rid of it. Even if it's a beautiful scene, and even if it took you all day to get it, if it doesn't propel the story, you should cut it. And that's painful. And that's also why you shouldn't edit your own films if possible, because as the filmmaker, you generally are emotionally invested in what went into getting all those shots, and you may have a favorite scene or two that you know that you just like the way they look, but you've kind of maybe lost touch with the flow of the story, and so you want it in your film just because you know what went into it. Whereas an editor can come in and say, yeah, it's lovely, but it does nothing for the story, so we're going to cut it. Maybe you could put it on the deleted scenes on the DVD or something. And so I'm going to cut it right there with no pun intended. If you felt that this was helpful, we actually put a lot of work into coming up with these. and you would like to hear more, leave a comment or shoot us an email or something, and we'll maybe share some more with you if you felt that this was helpful in any way. So, thanks again for watching, and we'll talk to y'all later. Bye.